Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We're just going to wait 1 or 2 minutes just to let people trickle in, and then we'll get started. Okay, we have a full agenda today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our roundtable gathering, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emma Seeger, and I am the National Baby Friendly Project Director with the Breastfeeding Committee for Canada. And I am joined today by April Costello and Sarah Frittenberg, who are two of our BFI mentors working with us. So thank you, everyone. And just to start, I would like to do a brief land acknowledgement. My family moved from Ontario to Alberta recently. And so part of that obviously is, getting to know our new home and the stories of our new neighborhoods and our new city. So I just wanted to share a little story. This is a picture of what is called the Confluence in what is now downtown Calgary. And this is in a very important area. It's where you can see two of the big rivers meet. So the Bow and the Elbow River meet. And really, this is a place that has been very significant for thousands of years for Indigenous peoples as a place both of gathering and ceremony. And after Confederation, the Northwest Mounted Police arrived in the area, both to prepare for colonial settlement and then build Fort Calgary, which sits there today and is a historic museum. And it was at this point that they negotiated the signing of Treaty 7. And this covers the land around Calgary today. And Indigenous signatories, it's important to note, as part of this treaty making, really sought to share the land. It was not agreed to be surrendered. But once these signed laws were put in place, we saw a lot of Indigenous marginalization. We saw a lot of Indigenous displacement, and not very much of that sharing of the land that was, intended for the Indigenous population. So I just wanted to share this story, just to remind us that we're really surrounded by complex histories on the lands that we live and work and play on. And so I just wanted to invite everyone, to take a moment to reflect on the history of the land they live on. And if you feel like it, you can feel free to please share your own land acknowledgement in the chat, because I know we have a very diverse audience today from coast to coast. So I'm just going to pass it over to April now, and she's going to introduce our speaker, who is Karen Graham. Thank you. You're muted, April.
Oh, sorry. I had one job. Sorry about that, folks. So, as I was saying, I have the honor today to introduce Karen Graham to all of you as our speaker. So, Karen Graham is a registered dietitian and certified diabetes educator. She's a public health dietitian with Interior Health, British Columbia. She's a large project coordinator, passionate about improving outcomes for mother and child through best practices in hospitals, clinics, and communities. She is the innovator and coordinator of a series of interior health breastfeeding projects, ranging from 2013 to 2025, done jointly with nonprofit organization with external funding of $900,000 and collaboration with hundreds of interior health lactation consultants, physicians, nurses, midwives, and doulas and mothers. These projects include the Breastfeeding Art Expo, Breastfeeding Journey Mapping, and Breastfeeding System Change project that has led to the leading edge physician breastfeeding guide. Karen presented live in Australia at the Australian Breastfeeding Association's 2025 Multi-City Health Professional Seminar, where she learned about Australia's innovative breastfeeding strategies. Outside of interior health for the past 30 years, Karen has been promoting breastfeeding through her work as a published award-winning diabetes author. She sees breastfeeding as foundational to chronic disease prevention. So thank you so much, Karen.
Great. Thank you very much, April, for the kind introduction. And I have to say, it's a real honor for me to be here presenting to the BCC, your members, your interested followers. I know that this group represents a group of people who are extremely passionate about breastfeeding. I also have that passion for breastfeeding, and it's just a great pleasure for me to be here today. I'm going to do a screen share. And you can tell me when you can see my screen. Are you seeing my full screen?
We are, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's move up there. So I would like to say that I'm going to be presenting today on the Breastfeeding Systems Change project, as you mentioned, April. And I work for Interior Health. So this project over the last 12 years has been a collaborative project with a nonprofit organization called KCR, or Kelowna Community Resources. And it's also steered by a 10-member steering committee. Right. I'm just trying to get my button is not advancing, so I will use my mouse there to advance it. Okay, I'm also going to be speaking about the learnings from the Australian Breastfeeding Association. As mentioned, I was a conference speaker there in March 2025, and we'll have a 10-minute Q&A at the end. I'd like to also start with an acknowledgement. You see the Interior Health acknowledgement there, but what I'd like to highlight is the care and commitment to Indigenous women. So the TRC calls 19 and 55.4 are to close the gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous on maternal and infant health issues. And this includes supporting Indigenous women to return to their traditional practice of breastfeeding. And this has been a priority area of the Breastfeeding Systems Change project. I'd also like to say that this presentation uses sexed language consistent with the Society of Obstetrician and Gynecologists' mission to advance women's health, and the SOGC encourages all healthcare providers to have respectful conversations with patients to identify and utilize gender pronouns and words that the patient chooses and that affirms their identity. Just to let you know, there's a slide on the photo and graphic acknowledgements that are used within this presentation. So again, thank you, April, for that introduction. I work for Interior Health. I may be referring to it as IH, the short form for Interior Health, during my presentation. My manager is Katrina Lehenbauer. I've also put a list of the steering committee members there. I'm not going to go through it, but just so you can see, we have a broad range of steering committee members. We have 7 funders, 2 right now. One of our major funders over the last 12 years has been the Vancouver Foundation, and having close to $1 million in funding has certainly driven the work of the Breastfeeding Systems Change project. For those of you that know the Okanagan, that's a photo of me on the top of Knox's Mountain in Kelowna. I am a dietitian and certified diabetes educator. I'm not an IBCLC. I've had the great honor and pleasure of working with many, over 100 IBCLCs over the last 12 years, and honor and respect the work that they do, and I've learned so much from them. I am a mother of 2 babies. I was very fortunate to have early skin to skin and have wonderful breastfeeding experiences with both of my babies. But I recognize that many women do not have that experience, and that's certainly a driver of the work that I do. I'd like to let you know that there is a website which has all the information I'm going to be talking about on the Breastfeeding Change project. It's hosted by our nonprofit organization, breastfeedingchange.ca. I've put the link as well as the QR code there. And there's lots of videos and films. All our documents are on here. They're all downloadable for free. So today with the Breastfeeding Systems Change project, I'm going to start telling you just briefly about the Breastfeeding Art Expo, which is where we started back in 2013. And the goal of this was to heighten awareness and create opportunities for change. And it certainly did do that, because one of the major outcomes was the designation that happened with BCC support of the Penticton Hospital and Health Center, and I'll be telling you a little bit about that later on. And sort of simultaneous to the Art Expo, there were 3 large-scale community petitions that happened in our region. And these petitions were large. We're talking about 700-800 signatures, but they weren't just signatures. Women wrote their stories in detail, and they were asking for improved breastfeeding services, but it's fair to say that they were basically ignored. So that led us to do evaluation of our own, because we needed to prove to management that there were gaps in breastfeeding services. So we did journey mapping and we did physician roundtable. And so that led over the last 5 years to 7 major projects that have been done. I'm going to be telling you briefly about each of those, but most of my time will be spent on our most recent physician breastfeeding guide. So just a couple slides on the Breastfeeding Art Expo, just to give you a little bit of a taste. So this project molded art with health, and through this process, we engaged hundreds of organizations and communities. Importantly, we engaged senior management towards improving breastfeeding support. You can see in that orange box how much involvement there was from so many people in this project. This was the largest expo that the world has ever seen specifically related to breastfeeding, before and since. It still remains as the largest breastfeeding art expo in the world. It was amazing. And if you're interested in art and you'd like to read some of the stories, I encourage you to go to the Breastfeeding Art Expo catalog. I've put the link there. I do also have print copies of pretty much all the resources I'll be talking about today. So if you're someone who likes print copies, just drop me an email and I'll pop one in the mail to you. It's great reading in the Art Expo catalog. So we traveled to 9 galleries in six cities, and we had over 6,000 visitors over a 1-year period. This is our opening night in Kelowna, and at the end, you can see down here, that's Leah Geiger presenting. She was one of our keynote speakers for one of our events. And Leah from the Provincial Health Authority was certainly an important and ardent supporter of the breastfeeding work happening in IH, starting with the Breastfeeding Art Expo, later the BFI designation, and everything in between. So I want to just show you just a couple of examples to give you a little bit of taste of the Breastfeeding Art Expo. So we had community projects, 15 of them. For these projects, we hired artists, we paid them, and they had between a year to a year and a half to work with community members and organizations and businesses to develop art pieces. So this particular piece, you're seeing 2 of the 7 life-size busts where mothers' stories were interpreted by artists. They were amazing busts. 3 of these actually stand in the lobby of the Penticton Regional Hospital now. Another interesting community art project was done with grade 9 to 11 students who wrote poetry on the topic of breastfeeding and presented live at a cafe, plus were recorded. The picture you see up here in the right-hand corner, that's a young girl watching one of the videos where they're presenting their poetry, and that's at one of our art expos. And I think the fact that breastfeeding is not part of school curriculum is confounding, because the majority of these students had never had any learnings around breastfeeding. And they were actually really excited to learn about breastfeeding and to work on this topic. And when you think how critical breastfeeding is for the long-term survival of humankind and of our microbiome and disease protection, it's really quite shocking that we don't teach breastfeeding in our schools. So this is another community art project. It was a collaborative project with the university microbiology department where the artists looked at human milk under the microscope. And this image on the left-hand upper corner is 16 images, black and white, from an electron microscope of human milk. So you're looking at proteins and fats and beneficial microbes, enzymes, etc. And the artist took one of those images and created the large acrylic painting that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. And we actually loved that image so much, the steering committee, that we decided to use that image for the front cover of the physician breastfeeding guide that you see in the middle. So in addition to the community artworks, we had 70 independent artworks. We had a whole variety of kinds of artwork. We had men and women who submitted work. We had multicultural pieces. It was just a fabulous variety. That's a small selection that I'm showing there. Oops. Oh, this is not working super smoothly here. There we go. This particular piece is called Mother's Milk. I love this piece because it represents the explosion of nutrients and active immunity factors, probiotics, microbiome, that are the life force of human milk. And the young fellow on the left is looking and appreciating that picture. This piece is called Breast Crawl. And as you can see from the image on the left-hand side, that little baby is working so hard. He's just been born, he's been put on the mother's stomach, and he's crawling up to the mother's breast, ready to latch onto her nipple. The mirror represents the mother's head, but when you look in the mirror, as the viewer, you also see what the mother sees when she looks down and sees her baby doing the breast crawl. This piece is called Herculean Ordeal. And what we did was we brought together a lactation consultant and a social worker and a group of mothers who did not have a good first experience and who were each devastated because they weren't supported to breastfeed. So we hired an artist who sat in the room and listened to their stories and saw their tears. And the artist developed this art piece to give these women a voice. And it has words such as judged, alone, shattered, insufficient, and failed. And it is this piece, more than any of the art pieces, that drives the work that I do to get better care for mothers and to develop strategies to support women to successfully breastfeed their next baby. No mother, no parent should have to go through what these women went through, but we all know this is happening all too often, and it's why we all do the work that we do. So in addition to art pieces that looked at the, that celebrated breastfeeding, challenged some of the issues around breastfeeding, we also created art pieces that were informational, such as the importance of breastfeeding, those 3D posters, and we developed a poster on the 10 steps to successful breastfeeding in hospital. At the time we did the Art Expo, we did not have the BFI designation in Penticton yet, so this is something that we were working towards. I wanted to show you this slide because it shows the Art Expo that we did at the Algonquin Center at the Penticton Indian Band, which was one of the 9 galleries that we went to. You can see from the photo on the left, the beautiful location with those tall timbers. We had 12 Indigenous partners, 6 Indigenous community art projects, 3 independent pieces, and 2 Indigenous steering committee members as part of the Art Expo. And the picture on the right was the opening night. We had a drumming circle, and we literally went around that whole circle, and everybody told a breastfeeding story. It took about an hour and a half, but it was wonderful, and it was also healing. And it was just a great experience. And we were at this gallery for 6 weeks. Here's a small snippet of some of the Indigenous art that was at the show. And I wanted to talk to you about one piece in particular, which was this piece here. It's called Baby's Gratitude. And the Indigenous woman who did this art piece is a real advocate for breastfeeding. And when her firstborn was, her first baby was born, her son, at 2 months old, she was struggling with breastfeeding. She was in a lot of pain. She had cracked nipples. She was driving, she was ready to give up. And her son was crying. She was crying. She stopped the car. She took the baby out of the car seat to breastfeed him. And he reached up and he put his hand on her chest, as you see, and she took a cell phone and she took a picture of it. And she said it was this picture that inspired her to keep going. And at that point, or after that point, she went to her doctor. They diagnosed a tongue tie. They got it clipped. Breastfeeding became enjoyable, and she breastfed her baby for 13 and a half months. So her story had a happy ending. And we can't talk about the Art Expo without talking about the piece on the left, which is an abstract artwork of a mother breastfeeding with her family by Mary Kate Woodward. And when BCC put your call out for a new logo, I put the call out to some of the people who had participated in the Art Expo, and I heard later that Mary Kate Woodward had submitted a piece, and you see her art piece in your BCC poster. So this is the picture on the right, shows the day of the BFI designation celebration of the Penticton Hospital and Health Center in our region, April 2024. And on the left is the manager of the hospital. On the right is the manager of the public health. In the jean jacket in the middle is Leah Geiger from the province. And in the red is the incomparable Maggie Ross. And for those of you that know Maggie, you know how amazing she is and how dedicated and passionate about breastfeeding and how hard she worked and brought her teams together to achieve that BFI designation. So definitely thank you to all the BCC assessors and those, of course, this is your baby doing the BFI designations, and it doesn't happen without your help. And for us in our region, the Penticton BFI is a pilot project for our whole region. So we've talked about the Art Expo, the petitions, the BFI. Now I want to talk to you about the journey mapping and physician roundtable, which was our evaluation. I'm not going to spend time talking about the physician roundtable, but basically it was a group of physicians we brought together, and for a couple of hours, we talked about what were their needs, and we created a report from that. The results of that were very similar to the journey mapping. I want to tell you about the breastfeeding journey mapping, though, because it's a really exciting process. So we did journey mapping with three groups of mothers and one group of healthcare providers. Journey mapping is a qualitative evaluation process. For those of you who don't know what it is, it looks at the big picture and it answers the how and why of an issue. And that map that you can see on the right-hand side, that's 10 feet long by 4 feet tall. These are huge, these maps. It's a really fun process. So we brought 3 groups. In each group, there was approximately 10 women and their support persons, and they told their breastfeeding stories, good and bad, from prenatal to 6 months postnatal. We also had one group of 10 healthcare providers. Each of these 4 sessions were 3 to 5 hours long, and we had food and comfortable space. You see the space in one of the examples up in the top right. It was really important to have that comfortable, safe space because moms were telling stories that had trauma attached to them, and there were a lot of tears. They needed to be comfortable in that space. For every journey map session, we had 4 core questions. We had a professional facilitator. You see her on the right-hand side in the yellow sweater. And on the left is the professional graphic illustrator who recorded the group stories in real time with graphic illustrations. And what I love about journey mapping is it shows the big picture by the time you finish the map, but it helps you identify where things are breaking down in the system. And from the journey mapping, we saw lots of breaks. And so we ended up with 15 recommendations. There's a picture of the 4 maps. I know it's a very full slide, my apologies, but I wanted to show you all the maps together. So up at the top in the purple blue is the Kelowna Mother's Map, and the orange map is the Kamloops Mother's Map. The Shuswap Mother is the Indigenous journey map that we did, and for that one we had an Indigenous facilitator. And then the blue one at the bottom is the map we did with the healthcare providers. So Kelowna and Kamloops are our two largest cities, and as I say, we did the Indigenous and the healthcare providers as well. So what I want to show you now is just a small example of some of the comments that were within those maps. So let's look first at some of the journey map comments from mothers during their hospital stay. So one mother said, birth went as expected. Someone else said, birth plan went out the window. They talked about the impact of C-sections and the unintended impacts of medication on the ability to breastfeed. One mother said, I felt I just had to do what the doctor said. Someone else said, I didn't even know my options. One mom said, I lacked the presence of mind to advocate for myself. And how could we expect a mom who's just gone through a long labor to be able to have the presence of mind to advocate for herself? That is our job. Another mom said she was so exhausted, I wasn't sure I could take in all the information. And in general, the moms felt isolated and vulnerable. They also reported there was inconsistent knowledge sharing and inconsistent levels of support. They were told things such as, you have a lazy baby, you can just top off with formula. They talked about that skin to skin was time sensitive. Some had immediate skin to skin, which was great. Some had delayed skin to skin. One mom didn't get to hold her baby for an hour and a half, even though her baby and she was well. And she was asking for her baby. So that was a traumatic experience. And these types of traumas led moms to experience a loss of power and choice, loss of confidence as a new mom, loss of trust, and often interventions that led to more interventions. Now, not all the comments were negative. We had positive comments. One mom said she had competent, caring professionals who helped her. Another said she connected with a lactation consultant for support services. And one said a nurse showed her how to hand express and feed her baby by syringe. So this is the journey map for healthcare providers. It looks a little bit different, but we had the same 4 core questions and the same overarching themes. The discussion just happened a little bit differently with the healthcare providers. And here's a few things that they said. They wanted to front load childcare education in the journey. What they meant by that was they wanted moms to know about breastfeeding before they came into the hospital and delivered their babies, because that's probably the worst time to try and learn a new skill. You're under a lot of stress, you're overwhelmed, you're exhausted, and hormones are flying. So let's teach mom about breastfeeding. Let's show them how to do hand expression, but let's do that in the prenatal period of time. They also talked about how there was a lot of time pressures to cover topics and liability and how they had to check things off. And this was particularly from the nurses. So they felt badly that they didn't have that time to just sit by the mom's bedside, observe what was happening and be supportive in the way that a lactation consultant working on a ward. But unfortunately, in our region, except for Penticton, we don't have lactation consultants on our wards. They also talked about being mindful of perception, and they talked about the importance of continuity of care after moms were discharged, recognizing that moms are being discharged often, at 24 to 48 hours. This particularly became apparent when we did the First Nations journey map, because the First Nation band nurses said they often didn't hear from the hospital at all. They didn't know a mom had been discharged, whether it was urgent for her to be seen, and so on. So that continuity of care and communication, very important. So what healthcare providers wanted was more lactation consultants and other in-person supports for moms, enhanced breastfeeding knowledge, available resources, and referrals. And we found that there were some emergent themes from the breastfeeding journey mapping. So before birth, the mother's theme was that we get conflicting information. Healthcare providers' theme was prenatal education is essential. In the hospital, the mother's theme was we need to be empowered. Healthcare providers said, we need more time to support mothers and more breastfeeding training. And back home, mothers said they often felt alone, and the healthcare providers recognized that there were gaps in services. So the journey mapping taught us that what you say to mothers counts, the way you say something is important, and that communication has to be consistent. It has to be plain language so mothers understand it, and it has to be caring. We all know that breastfeeding is about oxytocin and those mothers feeling loved and supported so that they can have that positive letdown. So 15 recommendations emerged from the journey mapping, and this has led to the development of 7 key projects and resources over the past 5 years, which I'm now going to tell you about. And as I mentioned, I will be spending most of my time talking about the physician breastfeeding guide, but we'll look at the other ones as well, starting first with the swivel bassinets in hospitals. So this was the first ever breastfeeding bassinet trial in North America. There had been trials using swivel bassinets that swivel 360 degrees and can swivel across the mom when she's in bed, but they'd never looked specifically at did it benefit or not breastfeeding. So this one was specifically looking at breastfeeding. We used the Halo brand swivel bassinet. The project was led by Jocelyn Haight, a nurse in IBCLC in our region as part of her Masters of Nursing. Maggie Ross and myself and her supervisors at the university also were part of the project. There were 2 trials over a 1-year period in 2 hospitals. We purchased 7 bassinets, and 42 patients or staff fully completed the online survey. So what were the impacts? Well, on the good side, well, actually, these were all good side. There were no safety concerns, so very happy about that. But interestingly, we saw there was even a potential for safer sleep practices compared to the standard bassinets. Moms love them. There was an opportunity for more frequent breastfeeding. And since the trials, other hospitals across BC have purchased Halo bassinets. This is actually a photo of my niece who recently had a baby in Vancouver, and she was using the bassinet, and she said she loved it. The study showed that the women who benefited the most were those who'd had a C-section, because they were able to have their baby closer, have more contact, have that early response to the baby's feeding cues for breastfeeding. So that was definitely the group who they seemed to benefit the most. Our second project was the breastfeeding phone line video calls. We piggybacked on an existing program in our region called Healthy from the Start, Pregnancy Connection. So this was a pregnancy phone line, and you can see from the poster on the left-hand side, that's a new poster we've developed, and it now includes breastfeeding support as part of the program. So the impacts were that we redesigned a pregnancy-only phone line to a program that now assists mothers with breastfeeding pre and postnatally. We expanded it to include online video calls because the counselors on the calls recognized that to be able to help moms with breastfeeding, they needed to be able to see the latch and to see the position to have the greatest benefit. So it's been expanded to the video calls. We've now hired IBCLC nurses. It was a 1-year pilot project that we did. It's now being completed. And the breastfeeding component is now permanently embedded in the routine clinical care of Healthy from the Start. That's amazing. That's what you want to happen with a 1-year pilot, is you want it to actually turn into permanent care, assuming that the pilot project has shown positive benefits, which it did. We created 3 4-minute breastfeeding videos. The project lead was Tiffany Holdsworth Taylor, a midwife and IBCLC who you see in the photo on the right. I've put the link and the QR code there if you'd like to watch them. They're wonderful videos. We did 3, what is a good latch? How often should my baby eat? And is my baby getting enough to eat? And the impacts of these videos were the films integrated our local hospital and staff in the filming and included moms and dads who were multicultural, including Indigenous. We had some hospitals that created posters for labor rooms with a QR code, which prompted families to watch those when they were in the hospital after labor. And it's a wonderful complement to the physician breastfeeding guide. All our projects are still ongoing, so we still have work to do on this to increase the awareness that these videos exist. Our fourth project was an Indigenous peer-to-peer training. I assisted Adams Lake Band in getting funding to support this peer-to-peer training for Secwepemc and other nations. Once that funding was secured, I stepped back on the project and it became an Indigenous-led project led by the band. It was 1 week of Indigenous breastfeeding counselor certification training. And the in-person training was led by Cami Goldhammer. Some of you may know her. She's a social worker, IBCLC, and Indigenous doula from Seattle. This was her first Canadian group, and she was really excited to come up to Canada. So the impacts, 13 participants that you can see in the photograph there, representing 7 First Nations. It was fantastic. The training was for Indigenous, by Indigenous. I was told by the organizer of this from the First Nation band that there was some flack around this decision to make it for Indigenous, by Indigenous, because it meant that the non-Indigenous nurses working on the band were not able to attend. However, I was told afterwards that they felt secure in their decision to do this because it created a comfortable and safe environment for open discussion and learning without any authoritative figures. Our fifth project was a brochure and toolkit that was created for local governments. So this includes towns, cities, municipalities, mayors, etc. And many of those communities had never ever thought about breastfeeding. I think that's fair to say. So we first created the brochure that we distributed to all of them. There was about 300 we distributed. So we wanted the local governments to understand the importance of breastfeeding, but also how could they positively influence breastfeeding rates by creating public spaces where mothers felt safe to breastfeed. And after 3 months, we followed up with a larger resource, which is a toolkit, again on breastfeeding friendly public spaces, but this one had policy plans in it and more detail for those that would like to go a little bit further. I've put the QR codes in for both of those. So what were the impacts? Well, it was a great opportunity to collaborate cross-portfolio because this project was actually led by the community health facilitators who work directly with local governments and university nursing students. It was such an amazing opportunity to engage with local governments. As I say, local governments that had never really thought about, is there some place for us to even think or talk about breastfeeding, within our government. An example of a positive impact was all the regional libraries put up signs and trained staff on how to create welcoming spaces for breastfeeding parents. And again, as with our other projects, we're continuing to try and extend the reach of these projects. So that brings me to the Physician Breastfeeding Guide. This is an evidence-informed practice guide for the healthy term infant. It's called the Physician Breastfeeding Guide, but it is for all doctors, family practitioners, ob-gyns, pediatricians, but it's also for midwives, nurse practitioners, nurses in the hospital, all maternity care providers. We called it the Physician Breastfeeding Guide because we knew if we called it the Maternity Breastfeeding Guide, physicians might be less likely to go to it. And they were one of our key target groups that we wanted to address. And we also felt that midwives and nurses would be comfortable to go to a resource called the Physician Breastfeeding Guide, but it is for all maternity workers. But it has lots of fabulous information in there specific for the physician. It's available for free download. There's a QR code and the link, but we have copies of it. If you'd like a free copy, just drop me an email. The email's there. I will pop one in the mail to you. And the copy, it's 70 pages. It's beautiful. It's just a marvelous resource to have at your bedside to read at night or in your office for clinical use. A little bit of background about the writing and distribution. We had 50 writers and reviewers. These were not ordinary people. These were physicians and healthcare providers who were passionate about breastfeeding and highly qualified. We had 2 ob-gyns, for example, in the physician group, 1 pediatrician. 5 of our 22 physicians that wrote or reviewed were IBCLCs. 4 were NABLM certified, which is the North American Board of Breastfeeding and Lactation Medicine, which is like the IBCLC certification, but specific for physicians. And then we had 28 other healthcare providers, many of whom were IBCLCs. So we had this amazing expert input in the writing and research, but we also relied on over 100 references and relied heavily on the ABM protocols in particular. So we've printed 3,000 copies. We've already distributed 2,000. They've gone out to all our interior health hospitals, public health units, physician clinics, midwifery clinics. They've also gone to all of our First Nation communities within our region and across BC to First Nation communities, and even nationally because they were distributed at a national Indigenous health conference. And they've gone to our regional university nursing programs. Distribution is ongoing. The next group I'd really like to get these out to is the training program. So training for physicians, for nurses, for midwives, dietitians, etc. That's where we need to start learning about breastfeeding so that we have that base knowledge once we come out into clinical work. So these are the topics that are covered in the Physician Breastfeeding Guide, starting with the executive summary. Section 1 is prenatal, Section 2 is the hospital section, 3 is postpartum, 4 is the BFI, 5 is resources, and we have a troubleshooting common breastfeeding problems section. I'm going to be focusing on section 1 to 5. So starting with section 1, which is the breastfeeding discussions and assessment in the prenatal, we really want all doctors, all healthcare providers have any kind of contact with moms during the prenatal period to talk about breastfeeding. So we've provided conversational openers in this chapter to discuss breastfeeding with pregnant women and their families. And you'll see from the table of contents, it includes things like talking about the benefits of breastfeeding, lactation history, which is really important if you're seeing a mom, particularly who had some challenges or who has some risks for potentially having some challenges with breastfeeding. We also discuss prenatal hand expression of colostrum, intrapartum interventions that can impact breastfeeding, and other prenatal breastfeeding topics, and ending with the patient handout, preparing for breastfeeding. So here's a baby, and he is attentively reading the Physician Breastfeeding Guide. And he's on the section on the benefits of breastfeeding. Here's our patient handout. We thought, what could we put on one page? And you can download this as a single one-pager, but it's the page within the Physician Breastfeeding Guide. And it's the things that we'd want a mom to think about if she's planning for breastfeeding. So a lot of moms do birth planning, but we want moms to do breastfeeding planning as well. So we talk about hand expression, seeking out labor support. There's a fantastic series of birth to post-birth videos that moms could link to. It's had 1 million views on YouTube, really popular. The importance of skin to skin, breastfeeding positions, comfortable latch, frequent feeds is normal, colostrum for extra feeds, and having those support names at hand. So if they're on the ward, they've delivered or they've gone home early and they need that lactation consultant, who could they call to have those names at hand? We have a 2-page section in the prenatal section on the intrapartum interventions. And what we learned is that there's a lack of awareness by mothers about the effect of intrapartum interventions on breastfeeding, but there's also a lack of awareness by healthcare providers. And in some cases, not even realizing the potential impact of opioids, especially IV or IM received during labor. So we talk about the intervention examples, which one have minimal effects, such as nitrous oxide, and those that will have more significant effects on making the baby sleepy, such as the opioids IV or IM. And we also talk about what you can do, a more positive intervention to reduce those intrapartum interventions, which is having the continuous labor support. So that has been proven, that continuous labor support by a midwife, by a doula, or by a partner who's been provided some support of how to support that woman, a partner, a husband, a family member. That continuous labor support means the woman feels more calm, The labor progresses better and has been proven to have less intrapartum interventions and therefore is good for breastfeeding. An example of a prenatal case study. We've got a woman with gestational diabetes who wants to breastfeed. She tells you, I don't want to go on insulin because then I'll need to be induced or I'll need a C-section. I've heard breastfeeding is harder if you have a C-section and I really want to breastfeed. A little bit to unpack here because she's got some misconceptions about the insulin, but we really want to support her to breastfeed, and it's wonderful that she's thinking that. Down in the left-hand side here, you'll see the reasons that extra support may be needed for her as a person with gestational diabetes. Her mature milk may be delayed. She may have an induction at 38 or 39 weeks if she doesn't spontaneously go into labor, and she may possibly have a C-section. The baby may have low blood sugar after birth, which may result in some separation of mom and baby, which could affect breastfeeding. So what are some actions? We would want to clarify the role of insulin, that it can actually help protect her baby from high blood sugar and make the need for a C-section less likely. Taking insulin is not a reason to be induced or need a C-section. And in the context of gestational diabetes, polycystic ovary syndrome, insulin resistance, this is a good opportunity to consider starting her on the metformin at about 36 weeks to enhance cell sensitivity to insulin and therefore to enhance her milk production. So we're not talking about giving metformin for managing her blood sugars here. We're talking about giving it to enhance her milk production because of the role of insulin in milk production. And we have a fairly good section. We have a full page on the role of metformin when we talk about later about galactagogues in the guide. If milk is delayed, she may need short-term supplemental feeds. That's where any stored colostrum from prenatal hand expression is going to be helpful. And you never want that mom to walk out the door without having some support. So you might want to ask her if she wants to be referred to a lactation consultant in the prenatal period. Have that lactation consultant referral happen early to help her make a breastfeeding plan. Section 2 is the hospital section, the 0 to 72-hour hospital breastfeeding algorithm, and 12 amazing breastfeeding tips. We also have patient videos and handouts. So this is what the algorithm looks like. This is page 17 of the guide. I know it's small, so I just wanted to show you the whole page, but I'm just going to show you the top 1/3 of this algorithm. And so the top 7 bullets look at those things that we would love to happen in the first 2 hours, from birth to 2 hours, whether it's a vaginal or cesarean for the healthy baby and healthy mom. We want that immediate skin to skin, uninterrupted skin to skin. We want to defer the baby's bath. We want to allow time for the baby to go through the instinctive breast crawl stages. We want to support the dyad with position and latch. We want to affirm with mother that it's going well, provide that love and support that she needs. We want to help her with hand expression if baby has not latched or is separated. And we want to do a breastfeeding assessment. And you'll see where it refers to in red, C practice tip 1 or C2 or C11. That refers to the 12 practice tips which follow the breastfeeding algorithm. And we have 2 questions in the algorithm. Is baby feeding effectively, and are mother's breasts pain-free? And if you answer yes to both of those questions, you go to the left column, which is routine care and assessment. But if you answer no, you go to the right column, and then we'll be giving you more advice of what to do and where to go for the practice tips, which practice tips to look at.
Oh, Karen, somehow it's muted.
There we go. Unmuted now?
Yes,
okay.
perfect.
Thank you. Okay, so breastfeeding practice tips 1 to 12. So there you see the practice tips, and I just highlighted the hand expression because we talked about that earlier. So I thought, that's a good example to look at here in the practice tips. We know when mothers learn hand expression, the skill gives them the confidence to relieve breast fullness, whether that's related to excess IV fluids that were given during labor or just when her milk's coming in, and to express milk if needed for supplemental feedings. And of course, it's tactile touch, stimulates oxytocin, and the milk ejection reflex. So then the question sort of arises, how do we make the 0 to 72-hour hospital practices sustainable? So here they are. We've got those practice tips. We've got the algorithm. So I want to tell you about a really exciting pilot project that we're doing with the Guelph General Hospital. So in fall of 2025, I had meetings with the lactation consultants at the mother-baby unit of Guelph General Hospital. The lead is Nancy Kurlowitz, nurse IBCLC. She may be on the video listening in today. And they had a brilliant idea. I love brilliant ideas. When policies are dry and boring, they said, no one looks at them. So we've got infant feeding policies. They're dry and boring. No one's looking at them. If we don't look at them, we don't follow them. So why not make them reader friendly and graphically interesting to encourage maternity staff to follow them? And they loved the 0 to 72-hour section of the physician breastfeeding guide. So we're doing a pilot to incorporate the 0 to 72-hour hospital section into the Guelph Hospital's infant feeding policy. We have had to do some small adaptations, and we're working on this right now, replacing the BC links with Ontario links. We had to make some small adaptations to meet the needs of the hospital, removing some design elements, adding in some overview statements. Nancy's going to be doing some evaluation once it's implemented. And I'm really excited about this work happening because I'll be bringing the results back to Interior Health, because working with the BFI pilot in our region, it would be fantastic to consider incorporating into our policies, our infant feeding policies as well. Section 3 is the postpartum section on assessing and managing low milk supply. And as you know, low milk supply is the most common reason for women to stop breastfeeding. It's so important we devoted a whole chapter to it. And you can see from the table of contents for this section, we start off with simply observing the baby at the breast, what you see in the photo, that quick office assessment. Sometimes solutions can be found by doing that. If not, you may need to move forward into other sections, such as the history, the physical exam, the tongue tie assessment, differential diagnosis, maybe some lab investigations, management, including galactagogues, and patient handouts and physician handouts, and quick courses on low milk supply are at the end. Here's a postpartum case study. 6-week-old baby, mom questioning low milk supply. She says, I'm worried I'm not making enough milk because he's always feeding. I think I should give him formula. So actions. We clearly want to start off always to support the mom with kind and encouraging words for the great job that she is doing. We want to watch that feed during the office visit to determine, is it really low milk supply, or is this just something she heard on Instagram, from other moms, and she's wondering if this, is her situation as well. Page 37 of the guide for the advice on doing the office visit. If that doesn't answer your questions, you may want to do the maternal and infant history to determine a possible cause, page 38. You'd want to ask, has mom been giving a supplement? Is she using a nipple shield, both of which can decrease her milk supply? You may need to go to the focused tongue tie assessment, differential diagnosis, management of galactagogues. The pages within the guide are noted there. And if you don't have time, if you're short of time, which so many health providers are, you never want that mom to leave your office without giving her some support or knowing where she can go for support, referring her to an IBCLC, to a lead leche league, to a public health nurse, because she's sort of on that brink of maybe quitting, and you want to give her that benefit of having continued health benefits for herself and her baby. Section 4 is on BFI. You can see the table of content, the topics we cover. And under the how to make your clinic breastfeeding friendly, we talk about an easy step, which is to post a breastfeeding poster or symbol on your office door. This gives your patient permission to talk about breastfeeding, and then follow with removing infant formula marketing and promotion. Section 5 is resources and referrals. I just want to tell you briefly about a really amazing website that we have in British Columbia. It's a unique BC website. It was developed by physicians and it has over 59 health topics. All our physicians in BC use this, whether they're wanting to look up information or referrals on diabetes, on dermatology, on renal, whatever the topic. But the problem was there was virtually no information on breastfeeding. So when they went up there, they couldn't get the breastfeeding information. So as part of our project, we significantly enhanced the breastfeeding information, created a breastfeeding care pathway that physicians and midwives can access. And we specifically now, we're looking at topics that are not covered in the physician breastfeeding guide. So in the guide, they can get that basic information. And if it's not there, they can go to pathways. So there's information on twins, on low birth weight, babies, pregnant, breastfeeding an adopted baby, alcohol and other substances, and special populations such as 2S/LGBTQIA+. There's a quick list of breastfeeding continuing education and resources, and a quick list of consultations and referrals. The quick list of consultation and referrals is fairly specific to our region, Interior Health in British Columbia. So we feel it's important that the healthcare providers are knowledgeable and comfortable with breastfeeding, but we also want them to feel confident to refer patients to IBCLCs or a public health nurse or La Leche League in your area where needed. And that's why this referral section is so important. So what are the impacts of the physician breastfeeding guide and pathways? First, it meets the key physician needs identified in the journey mapping and physician roundtable. And what's so beautiful is it also benefits all our other healthcare maternity providers. We've had extensive distribution already across Interior Health. We've also shared across BC. And now with this event, I hope some of you from Canada, across Canada, will have a copy and be able to tell others about it. We've also promoted it internationally because I went to Australia. We're providing online training to physicians, nurses, and dietitians. That's continuing. And we recognize the need to evaluate and continually revise. So we're doing ongoing content updates with physician experts on the Pathways website. And we have a survey on the Physician Breastfeeding Guide. I put the link there to the monkey survey as well as the QR code to the survey. And we're going to be, that's open till the end of the year. And then we'll be looking at it to see if revisions are needed for 2026. That photo you see is a display that I did at a recent physician education session. And just set up the display, had free copies. I gave about 25 copies out to physicians. They absolutely love them. The doctors are telling us that they have needed this resource for so long. They really haven't felt comfortable supporting moms to breastfeed. We know that. But they know that as well. And they're really happy to have this resource that gives them guidance. So summary pros of the Breastfeeding Systems Change Project. This sort of moving across portfolios has been really important. We now have our first hospital and health center BFI designated in Penticton, and we also have a permanent IBCLC position. It's for Penticton. We still don't have any on our wards, but we're going to take our wins where we can and continuing advocating and fighting for more. Of course, we've developed the guidance document in the Physician Breastfeeding Guide. Are there outstanding issues? Is there more of our evaluation recommendations that we haven't covered? Definitely. I think that's probably consistent Interior Health and across Canada. How do we implement these policies in practice? You know, put them in place. Maternity, birth areas are very complicated. We've got ob-gyns, we've got family doctors, we've got midwives, we've got nurses. Everybody's got their own egos, their own training, their own specialty areas. Getting policies and practices in place is a challenge, but that's definitely one of the benefits of BFI. Scaling up the successful pilot projects like what we did with the phone line is really something we want to work more on. I've already mentioned our lack of IBCLCs. I'd love to see lobbying for national standards within hospitals. Lack of doulas hired to support mothers. We have midwives covered, but not doulas. In BC, we do have Indigenous doulas covered, but non-Indigenous moms have to pay. And we have high C-section rates, which affect breastfeeding, but that's all across Canada. as well, and that's a more complicated topic. So just sort of a question which I'm going to bring back to our Q&A, which is how can Interior Health collaborate with BCC to improve breastfeeding support across the country? Just take a little bit of a breather. We're going to move on now to talk about the learnings from the Australian Breastfeeding Association. And we're going to go down under and just explore Australia and what they do with their breastfeeding strategies. And I think for any of you that have traveled to beautiful Australia, you know that Australia has a lot of similarities to Canada. And I think because of that, we have a lot to learn from each other around breastfeeding strategies. So let's just slow down a bit and talk about koala seeding. And I want to share a fun factoid about Australian koalas. Koalas are marsupial mammals, as you probably know. So the babies are breastfed their mother's milk while in the pouch. But koala mothers also feed their babies a specialized nutrient-rich form of their own feces called pap, which is rich in microbiome. So when she feeds her poop to her baby, the baby then develops their own gut microbiome needed to later digest eucalyptus leaves. And that's why I call it koala seeding. And, you know, isn't nature and breastfeeding simply amazing? All right, my presentations for the Australian Breastfeeding Association. So I actually did 3. I started in the fall of 2024. It was the 60th anniversary for the ABA volunteers. They had heard about the Breastfeeding Art Expo, and they asked me to do their keynote presentation to their 1,000 ABA volunteers. And it was a presentation specifically on the Breastfeeding Art Expo. If you like the little bit I talked about, you can scan the QR code and hear the whole presentation. Then in March of 2025, I was invited to Australia by the Australian Breastfeeding Association. They funded me to travel to Australia, which I think was an incredible tribute to the work that was happening in Interior Health. That's a photo on the right-hand side of me presenting in Melbourne at one of the sessions. So the way that their healthcare provider seminar works is the presenters travel as a group to 4 cities across Australia: Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, and Brisbane. And if you've been to Australia, you know that's a big country just like Canada. So there was a lot of traveling. This event was also recorded for the conference participants. And then in April 2025, number 3, I did an online presentation, and the Australians were really interested in the Physician Breastfeeding Guide because they have a lot of fantastic resources on breastfeeding, but they actually didn't have anything on specific for physicians. So they were really interested in that. And they were also interested in the halo bassinets because they didn't have swivel bassinets within their hospitals. So during the time that I was there, as part of a traveling team of presenters, and you see some of us in that photograph there, we had an opportunity to share meals and coffees because we were traveling for 8 days together. And by the way, Australia has awesome coffee and coffee shops. I put that little picture of the reusable coffee cup, the Australian reusable coffee cup, because those are really popular there. And during the time that the traveling team that we were together, we had an opportunity to percolate information and brainstorm. And they were so curious about what's happening in Canada with breastfeeding, so I was able to share that. And I was so curious about what was happening in Australia, and I learned so much. A little bit about the Australian Breastfeeding Association, that's their website on the right. They are a nonprofit organization that's been running for 60 years. And as I mentioned, they had their 61 years actually now, I guess. They had their 60th anniversary last year. And I was actually reflecting on the BCC because I was looking at your website and saw it was formed in 1991 and initially as a Health Canada initiative. And next year will be 35 years for BCC. So congratulations on that date that's coming up. And that's also a wow. So ABA has 1,000 trained peer-to-peer breastfeeding supporters. and 25 paid staff between their full and part-time staff. So today I'm going to cover, there were a lot of aha moments when I was in Australia, but I chose 3 to talk about today. First, Australia's gender, language, and communication policy to support women's health and broad public communication clarity. Second, the Indigenous needs and resources. And 3, the really exciting Australian national breastfeeding strategy. So let's start first with the first aha moment, Australia's language and communication policy. So 5 years ago, Australia and UK were actually early adopters of inclusive language. Inclusive language is also called the de-sexed language. So sort of similar to where I think 5 years ago is sort of maybe where Canada, I'm seeing a little bit, sort of some early adoption of inclusive language. So the Australia moved for a short period, and the Australian Breastfeeding Association, so away from using breastfeeding and women-based language to using the gender inclusive or de-sex language, or they were using additive language, breastfeeding/chest feeding. And all ABA volunteers were required to use this de-sexed language. So what was the result of this? Well, in 3 short words, it's fair to say, they told me that nobody was happy. So they said that this issue became an absolute furore on the Australian news and social media. And I don't believe this has yet happened in Canada, but I believe it could be coming. So it was described to me as a firestorm. So literally a backlash of polarized complaints, which rather than being warm and inclusive, which was the purpose, it actually tore people apart, and it pitted women against the LGBTQIA+ community, and that's the term used in Australia. And it pitted the LGBTQIA+ community against women, which was clearly not the intention of ABA, ABC, which is the broadcaster like our CBC in Australia, it's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, or the government, because these things were happening, this change was happening in Australia and UK sort of simultaneously. So in one legal case, a UK National Health Services or NHS employee was fired for using the words mother and breastfeeding. So she sued the NHS, and the court actually ruled in her favor under legislation of protected beliefs that breastfeeding and mothering are deeply held cultural terms. So after this sort of furore and some of these legal cases, the UK NHS, the Australian broadcaster, went back to using sex language that had previously been used as the primary language, and used de-sex language or gender specific as appropriate based on the audience. And due to the controversy, the Australian government, who was funding the Australian breastfeeding strategy, asked the Australian Breastfeeding Association to do research and to develop a policy. So that is what they did. They developed a policy. And so this policy is now in place, and it requires the use, so it's a flip from where they went to, and then they flipped back. So it now requires the use of sex-specific language by their staff and counselors. So the women and staff who are counselors are required to use terms such as pregnant woman, birthing, mother, mom, maternal, breast milk, breastfeeding mother, breastfeeding counselor, and so on. The important policy exception, though, is when providing services specifically for the LGBTQIA+ community, or for individuals who wish to use gendered or sex-specific terms or may prefer gender-specific language, the ABA adopts their language of choice and uses whatever terms they want to use. Some examples there in the brackets. So there's the link to the policy if you'd like to take a look at it. It's not too long, it's about 3 pages. And the government of Australia, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, also switched back to using the language that had previously been used, and use sex-specific language. So I was thinking about this when I was in Australia, and after I came back, and then I had some conversations with some of the contacts in Australia. And I was thinking, well, the policy seems to be well thought out, but I was curious because it was a different place than where we were in Canada. And I wanted to know, how did ABA, really come to their decision? Like, what was the details of their research? What questions arose during their research? So this is what they told me. In their extensive research, they looked at other countries, and they looked at what was happening in the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. And following that, it led to their founding principles. So they wanted to meet diverse needs, but importantly, they wanted to ensure that information was clear for the larger population. These are the 4 top referenced articles that they told me they used. I've put the PDFs along the side because I found them really interesting. There was so much learning for me when I read these articles, things I really hadn't thought about before. So if this is an area of interest, I encourage you to take a look at those articles. The bottom 2 are more related to research, and there were actually a lot of things in there I'd never thought about how the definition of sex or gender in research could actually affect outcomes in terms of drug safety and so on. So if you're interested in the research component, you might want to look at those 2 at the bottom. So this is what they told me, that some of the questions that arose during the literature review. So was there a potential that they were inadvertently creating harm for women and causing a reduction in breastfeeding rates with their de-sex language? And what they discovered was actually people didn't know, like this research hadn't been done. So language changes were being made without knowing whether there would be an effect on breastfeeding rates. And I think, their thought was, if we're going to make a change, we really need to prove that it's not going to cause harm. So, for example, did chest feeding mean bottle feeding to the public? So you breastfeed a baby at your breast, and if you're feeding with a bottle, the baby, then you're feeding, that's chest feeding. So is that how the public interpreted it? And again, they didn't know those answers because the research hadn't been done. And does additive chest feeding language undermine breastfeeding with those unintended negative consequences for mother and child? Were they making women invisible? And did the majority of the cisgender mothers, in the case of ABA, those mothers that they were attempting to help, did they feel culturally safe and emotionally safe and lose trust with a counselor who was using chest feeding language? And I want to share that, separate from sort of the ABA, I've actually been approached confidentially by a surprising number of women, mostly from British Columbia, but also from across Canada, healthcare providers, including midwives and nurses, saying that they don't feel comfortable with additive breastfeeding language, but that there's a culture of fear within their workplace and they don't feel safe to talk about it. So that's just sort of on the side, but that was something that they were exploring as well. How safe did those mothers feel? One of the other questions was, had the introduction of chest feeding language caused public confusion for the general public? And one group they were particularly concerned about were those new immigrants or those who had lower reading levels. How was it being understood or interpreted? And when you tag on additive language, such as breastfeeding, chest feeding, onto a document, they wondered if that led, for example, a trans or non-binary person to believe that all their needs will be met in the document, or are they being falsely led on? So, for example, if we have a breastfeeding document and the only main change we do is adding breastfeeding, chest feeding at the top, but we don't have detailed information within there that is specific for the needs of a trans person, for example, talking about binding or testosterone use, does it answer their questions? And does it create some gender dysphoria with other words that can be used within that general document? So would they prefer a document that specifically speaks to them and addresses their needs? And you'll see that that question then gets answered later. By calling a woman a person or parent, does it assume her interests are secondary to her husband or partner and that the male partner has equal rights on a woman's decision about her body? They realize that that question in a country like Australia, and I think about us in Canada, where we have relatively high women's rights, But if you're thinking about women who are coming from other countries and maybe immigrating, who don't have the same women's rights and autonomy, or in other countries, that question, I think, for them became a little bit more important. They also asked, why is desexing of male language occurring less frequently or often not at all? And yet we're seeing so much desexing around breastfeeding. And then I thought this was really interesting. It was something I had never thought about. And when I was reading one of the articles, I saw they brought this up as well, which is desexed language improper use of Western privilege? And so what they're talking about here is that English is actually now considered the major language around the world. So people from different countries, if they're going to learn a second language, it's English. So is it our Western privilege that we're inserting words into the English language that is then being taken to other countries who may not think the same way as we do within the West? So the other thing important, there was many things they did in this process, but I'm telling you about the sort of key things, is they did comprehensive consultation with the LGBTQIA+ community. And what they learned is that the community is not a homogenous group. Even though there's one name there, there's many different people within that group. For example, lesbians don't necessarily think the same way as a trans man. And many lesbians, not all, but many actually prefer and use sex language. So a lesbian woman can refer to herself as a woman, as a mother, and breastfeeding. They also learned that trans individuals had different terms to describe breastfeeding. Chest feeding was not the only term. Examples of some of the other terms there. So that further was complicating terminology. And they learned that the trans and broader LGBTQIA+ community needed and wanted specific guidance that was specific to their population group. And so this led to the co-development of some phenomenal resources that were specific for the LGBTQIA+ community. So you see on the right here, this book that they've created, it's 120 pages. I've read it, it's fantastic. It's got beautiful stories in there. They've also created an online education class. Unfortunately, this ABA and Rainbow Families New South Wales resource is not available in Canada, but I did just want to draw to your attention, for those of you that are outside BC, if you don't know, the Transcare BC and the province, the provincial health services have created these amazing resources in combination with the Transcare BC. And I've got two examples. There's actually 9 handouts. Some are a couple pages, some are 12 pages. So for example, on these, you'll see topics being addressed is testosterone and body feeding. And the other handout is looking at binding during pregnancy and body feeding. And just to point out that these resources are not gender inclusive. They are specific to the transgender, two-spirit, and non-binary people. And because of that, they're able to support them in a way that applies to them and to feed and love their babies in the best way possible. So just some food for thought before I go on to tell you about the 2 other AB aha moments, which are short. Food for thought on language and supporting breastfeeding. I think it's okay to not be an early adopter and to learn from others' experiences. I know sometimes we're really anxious to be that early adopter, but learning is good too. And I wonder, is it time to open the discussion? And I also wonder if it's time to allow everyone to express how they feel. The second aha moment was related to Indigenous needs and resources. And Australia has had similar negative effects of colonization on Indigenous people as we've had in Canada. So both Canada and Australia, we need to look at improving our support and Indigenous initiatives to support breastfeeding, especially given the high rate of insecurity in Indigenous populations that combine with those lower rates of breastfeeding. Oh, I just want to acknowledge the BCC 2023 position statement on addressing racism, which of course looks at Indigenous people, and I see there's some great recommendations there as well. So when I was traveling with the team across Australia and we were presenting, one of the teams was the Marigajaga team from the Aboriginal Maternal and Child Health Services across New South Wales. And they presented on an Aboriginal peer support workers breastfeeding support program. It's a fantastic program. It had some similarities to the program that was done in the First Nation training program that we had in our region. But this has some ongoing funding to it. And they also shared some really fun Aboriginal breastfeeding videos that they've created. So last, let's talk about Australia's national breastfeeding strategy. So the federal and state Australian governments have created a joint Australian national breastfeeding strategy. It's called the ANBS, and I've put a link to it if you'd like to read about that strategy. It's an ongoing strategy that seeks to enable breastfeeding through policies, health settings, health professional education and training, and breastfeeding education and support. So initially they invested $10 million, and then from that point on in 2009, there's been ongoing support for different programming. 8 million initially went to support their 24/7 breastfeeding helpline, and 2 million went to the Australian Red Cross lifeblood to increase access to donor human milk for premature babies. So ABA really became the driver to get this national breastfeeding strategy. And I mean, they're a large organization, 1,000 volunteers. They lobbied politicians for this strategy. And they felt that was more beneficial than asking, IBCLCs or citizens to try and advocate directly to their CEOs, healthcare or politicians, not to say there's not benefit from that. And so, when I heard about this, I just thought, wouldn't it be absolutely awesome if in Canada we had a national breastfeeding strategy? I don't know whose role this is. BCC does so much wonderful work, and you perhaps are working in this area. I don't know. But I did, wonder, is it the role of BCC or who should be, taking on this? But I think it would be an amazing thing if we could get a strategy here in Canada. And so just to kind of concluding slides, and I am right on time. I just love for you to be part of the process and outcome. Let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's share and benefit from each other to help families across Canada. Please spread the word about the document, review it. Let me know your comments. If you want a print copy, send me an email. We'd love to learn from your experiences and challenges to strengthen the Physician Breastfeeding Guide in our 2026 revision. And I just want to conclude by saying that as the coordinator of the Breastfeeding Systems Change Project, I'm always going back to the journey mapping, because those are the recommendations from mothers and healthcare providers, and we need to continually assess how are we doing so that we can continue to support happy breastfeeding mothers and babies. So that brings me to the Q&A, and I've just brought forward a couple of questions that I talked about as I was going through. How can Interior Health collaborate with BC and other practitioners? Questions about national breastfeeding strategy, and any other questions and comments. And I expect there might be some in the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing here and see if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Karen. You're a busy lady. I just wanted one comment that I wanted to make was that I just discovered the Physician Breastfeeding Guide, and it's awesome. The benefit to having it online is that there's all kinds of embedded links on there, so it's really wonderful. Yeah. And I've been giving it out to our medical students coming through our hospital.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic, Sarah. And actually, I totally agree with you. The online one is the one you want to be using in practice to get those links. The reason we also went a print is there's so many documents online. We wanted to put it in front of people to get their attention first.
Exactly.
And then ongoing, it'll also be the online version that will get the edits as well.
Yeah, definitely. The print is definitely gets people's attention. And yeah, for sure.
Yeah, thank you.
I don't think there was any questions in particular. I got kicked off of Teams a couple of minutes ago, so I lost all the previous chats, but there were some people in the chat leaving their emails to have you mail them a hard copy. I have a compiled them all in an email, and I will send it off to you, Karen, afterwards in case
Super.
they're not on here. There were some comments, so if Emma, if you could
Sure.
just go through
Love to hear
those.
them.
For
Yeah.
sure, Sarah. Yeah, sorry for the Teams issue. So yes,
That's okay.
lots and lots of interest in that physician breastfeeding guide. So you can, that's great, Sarah, if you get in touch for those people requesting a print copy. And then for anyone interested in a e-version, I've just put the link down there in the chat, and also Karen had shared the QR code. So you can have a look at it there. It is, yeah, it's truly amazing, Karen. I think it's such a great resource. And definitely as a midwifery student, I wish I had had it. There are some comments just in sort of collaborating with other healthcare providers as well, so involving pharmacists in the work and nurse practitioners. So I don't know if you've had any team members involved from those roles.
Yeah, we definitely have. So we had a pharmacist who was on our review committee. She's actually a midwife and a pharmacist. She's a doctor of pharmacy. So it was fantastic to have her on board. And she looked at definitely our section on galactagogues. It was really important to have her. And in terms of nurse practitioners, yes, we had them on the physician roundtable. They were part of our review committee as well. And nurse practitioners have access, I may not have mentioned it, but they also have access to pathways. And so we are including nurse practitioners in our training sessions that we're doing as well. And actually, we're opening it up to all kinds of different professions. I just did training sessions with dietitians, my own profession, who get very little education about breastfeeding, even though to me breastfeeding is nutrition. So we're really trying to reach out to all and social workers. We've had social workers who've been involved at different levels and have attended our sessions as well. So they're a really important group as well. So trying to extend that reach to all healthcare providers so that no matter where a mom is in that prenatal, she gets that input. Or postnatal.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's so important to have that that interprofessional lens. It's really great. I just want to pull out a specific question as well. Amy had asked whether you could share the Ontario-specific revisions for supports from the Guelph pilot for 0 to 72 hours. Is that information publicly available?
Is Nancy on the call? Okay, I know Nancy said she said she was going to try, but she didn't know if she would have a patient or.
She's here, but she's here, but she's muted. She's waving.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay, hi, Nancy. So yeah, just to say we're in the preliminary stage, so I think it's fair to say, Nancy, we don't have anything to share at this point.
Sorry, it's the meeting function here. It's not easy for me to unmute. Just give me 1 second.
But I think I can answer that while Nancy's muted, is that I think the goal I would like to see, others know about how it worked, because there may be other hospitals that are interested in doing this. So definitely the work that's happening at Guelph and that Nancy's leading is really important work.
And you should be able to unmute yourself now, Nancy, if you want to. Yeah, thank you.
Hi there. Yeah, that did work. Thanks for inviting me in. Yes, it's been absolutely a beautiful thing. We have attached it to the procedure of breastfeeding, along with our policy that has been updated. So this is more a procedural guide, and then rolling this out to staff is kind of where we're at right now. We're just putting some polishing touches on and figuring out how we're going to roll it out to the staff. And then I'm collecting data before, and I'm going to collect data after and just see what it does for our breastfeeding rates overall. So that's like an exciting way to kind of capture that. And we also, it's kind of good timing because we have a lot of new staff as well. So then having this guide as a way of reintroducing breastfeeding to both new staff or staff that, have been here a long time and think they already know, or, are feeling like they're in a rhythm with their feeding support that can maybe have some new direction for them to take a look at, and having this as a guide really helps open up that conversation and inspire the nurses to take a new look with fresh eyes. And because it is so pretty and it's so good for physicians as well, that it's going to create that consistent messaging for folks. One thing we did do is, we're changing some of the links so that they're a little more local to us here in Guelph. And yeah, that's kind of where we're at with those. It's
Yeah.
been great working with you, Karen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy, and thanks for giving that summary. That's beautiful. And I just want to add that this project, the Breastfeeding Systems Change Project, which the guide falls under, is a little bit unique in that we did it with a nonprofit organization. So although I work with Interior Health, it's a partnership with a nonprofit. And so we're wanting to share as much as we can across British Columbia, across Canada. We're not, so sometimes when something is developed within a health authority, it's a little bit more difficult to do that sharing. But because of this joint ownership, if you want to say, with a nonprofit, we have more openness to be sharing. And really our goal is, to spread the word everywhere. Like, if we can help mothers, we're all dealing with the same things in terms of needing to support mothers. And I so agree with what Nancy said. We've used this as an opportunity, the guide, to do all kinds of continuing education in our region. And if anybody wants to do it in your region, where you work, and you're wanting some information in terms of our presentations or sharing or something like that, I'm totally happy to share. Don't feel like I own anything. This is all for mothers. If we can
That's
help
amazing.
healthcare
Thank you,
providers be
Karen.
more educated.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And Nancy, we'll stay tuned for for further information. It sounds like it'll be very exciting. Maybe we can invite you to present at another one of these roundtables once you have a bit more data. That would be amazing. On that note, April had posted a link to the evaluation just in the chat there. So we would love it if you filled that out. If you have a moment, if you have any ideas for future presentations, we would really, really love to hear that feedback as well. I know we're a couple minutes late, but I think, Karen, you said you were able to stay on. Yeah. Okay, perfect. So for anyone who's able to stay, that's great. We can just make sure that we wrap up all of our loose ends. And this presentation has been recorded, so it will be up on BCC's YouTube as well. So that will go up shortly for any colleagues who missed it. I see Hillary's hand up, so I will unmute Hillary, but I'm just going to make sure that we've covered everything in the chat. I think a lot of it is asking for that the physician guide. People are very, very interested, Karen. So that's amazing.
Fantastic.
And just a comment from Mark too. I think a national breastfeeding strategy would help a lot. It is challenging as there are many nuances province to province, and some provinces value and prioritize breastfeeding more than others. So yeah, it can really it's hard to have the cohesiveness. There is also one question here: is there continued funding, and what will you be doing?
Oh, that's a great question. There's no guaranteed continued funding. I have the nickname of Funding Queen. I think Maggie Ross gave that to me because whenever I need to do something, I go out and find funding. And it's amazing how much funding is out there once you get the technique of filling in funding applications. So I right now have two funders. So we're being funded internally within Interior Health through a program that funds physicians to do alternative work than standard clinical care. So I have an amazing physician that I work with, Dr. Virginia Clark, and she gets funded through that program. And she's doing so much work. She does the work on pathways and other things. So I have that funding right now. And then I've just received funding from our local foundation at the hospital, so the Kelowna General Hospital Foundation. And what's happening is foundations, which traditionally funded a lot of like equipment, are now funding sort of other types of programs. So they have funded us to help roll out the physician breastfeeding guide. So we have that funding in place. And our biggest funder, Vancouver Foundation, aren't funding us right now, but I do plan to go back. So the continued funding is simply continuing to apply to more different organizations. And I've had 7 different organizations fund over the 12 years. So it just shows you there's lots of people interested, where it can fall under, right? Food security, it can fall, lots of different categories. So, but it's not a guaranteed source. I have to just keep going out and asking for money, but people seem to give it. So
Yeah. Well, good for you, Karen. We all need a funding queen on our side. And then there was just one comment before I unmute Hillary. Are there any plans to translate the physician guide into French?
No plans at all. But if someone from within Quebec can come up with funding, we would do that. Why not, right? We'd fund it into all kinds of languages. We have no support for that, no financial support for that. But yeah, I'd love to do that. But no, there is no plans to have that happen. But yeah, you're right. It's a whole group of physicians within Quebec, particularly. But also maybe New Brunswick and so on that can't access if they're working exclusively in French. So I'm open to know of options and very supportive to have resources translated. So
we just need a French funding queen.
Yeah, exactly. Whoever put the question in, reach out to me after. We can chat a little bit more about it.
That's perfect. Hillary, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
That's great. Thank you. I'm not a health professional myself, but I am deeply, deeply committed to supporting citizens in lobbying for the kind of systems change that I'm so encouraged to have learned about in this session. There's actually a website called Citizens for the Code and the BFI.ca. I think I've got that right. It's something I created. It's like just a kernel of an idea. But I just want to remind everyone on this call that we're all citizens. And I know it can be tricky sometimes for people who are employed in health institutions to lobby within those institutions, but we're all people who vote in elections, and we can certainly lobby our MLAs, our MPPs, and our MPs. And I just invite people to connect with Citizens for the Code and the BFI. My intention is to build a team of citizens who will call on our governments to do what we all know needs to be done.
Great.
Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you, Hillary, and for the work that you do as a volunteer. That's amazing. And citizen advocacy. I mean, as I mentioned with Australia, they had a large organization, so we're able to do that. And they had those 1,000 volunteers. But I think in Canada, as you mentioned, having that citizen and us all working as citizens, yes, very important. Thank you for the work you do, Hillary.
I think that might be it for questions in the chat and the Q&A. So I think, you'll be sending out some print copies, Karen. And
yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
And I know you've shared your email, so people will be able to get in touch with you if they have further questions.
Yeah, just welcome people, anybody who wants to, have a conversation with me about anything at a later point. Like, for example, if you're interested in the 0 to 72 hour section, just send me an email. I'd love to jump on a call with you and chat, because as I say, there's so much learning across the country, and I think this is an opportunity to share and learn from each other. So, and thank you very much for having me here as a speaker at BCC. It was a real honor to be here.
Thank you so much. We really appreciated it. So much good learning out of today's session. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And the recording will be up on the BCC YouTube shortly. Hope everyone has a great day. Thank you.